Why forgiving yourself is harder than forgiving them. Carl Jung observed that the most difficult reconciliation a person ever attempts is not the one across the table from an enemy, but the one that happens alone, in a quiet room, with no one to perform it for. There is a line Jung wrote in Collected Works Volume 9, Part 1, Paragraph 45, and it says this: "The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow." And I want you to sit with that phrasing for a moment, because he did not say the meeting with oneself is pleasant, or healing, or even kind. He said it is a meeting with the shadow, the very thing you have spent a lifetime trying not to see. And here is what that means for you tonight. When you forgive someone else, you are forgiving a face across a distance, a face you can still walk away from if the forgiving does not take. But when you try to forgive yourself, there is no distance left. You are the room. You are the one being forgiven, and the one doing the forgiving. And that is why the second task is so much heavier than the first. It is not that you are crueler to yourself than you are to others. It is that self-forgiveness demands the one meeting you have organized your whole life to avoid. And if you have ever noticed that you can talk a friend down from years of guilt in a single conversation, and yet cannot manage the same mercy toward your own quiet list of failures, you are not broken. You are simply discovering the difference between these two kinds of meetings for the first time. And you are not the only one who has discovered it late, at 2 a.m, wondering what is wrong with you, when nothing at all is wrong with you. Only the shape of the task itself has finally come into view. So let me offer you 3 lines, spoken in the first person, present tense, and see if they land anywhere true. I have judged myself by a standard I would never dare apply to a friend. I have kept an old wound alive because some part of me believed I deserved to carry it. And the way out of that is not forgetting, and it is not excusing. The way out is this: I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. And again, I make the unconscious conscious. Before we go further, I want to gently invite you to subscribe, so that when the next piece of this teaching is ready, it finds you and does not pass you by. If something in what I just said made you go quiet, if some old unforgiven thing in you just shifted, type the words "face it" in the comments below. Just those 2 words. Let them be your small seal on this hour. The first key is this: forgiving another person and forgiving yourself are not the same door. They only look alike from far away. When you forgive someone who wronged you, you are dealing with an image, a face that exists partly out there and partly in your own mind. And even a hard forgiveness like that still leaves you standing outside the event, looking in. But when the wrong was yours, there is no outside to stand on. You are inside the very thing that needs forgiving. And Jung would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? You keep looking for the distance that lets you forgive your father, or your friend, or the one who left, and you cannot find that distance here, because here there is no other face. There is only your own." This is why people can sound almost noble forgiving a betrayal, and then fall completely silent when asked to forgive their own single moment of cruelty, of cowardice, of silence when they should have spoken. It is not hypocrisy. It is architecture. The machinery of forgiveness was built for 2 parties, and self-forgiveness asks it to run on one. Forgiving another is a transaction across a counter. There is a moment where you can hand the grievance back, or set it down between you, and even if they never pick it up, the counter itself gives you room to breathe. But self-forgiveness has no counter, no other side. Imagine a man who spends an evening forgiving a friend who forgot his birthday. By bedtime, the grievance has thinned to almost nothing. That same night, he remembers a phone call he never returned. His father, the last one, before the silence became permanent. And the same mind that just finished a clean forgiveness cannot move an inch on this one. There is nothing wrong with him. There is only the architecture doing what it was built to do. No one across the counter to receive the apology. Only him, holding both ends of the same rope. And there is a further wrinkle. When you forgive another person, time does some of the work for you. The sting dulls on its own schedule. But the room you stand in with yourself has no calendar of its own. It does not shrink with the years unless you actually walk into it. and look around, which is why some people carry a private failure from decades ago with the same freshness as yesterday. While the public grievances of that same decade have long since faded, one kind lives on a bridge that time wears smooth. The other lives in a room that only you can enter. I do not excuse myself by pretending the house is empty. The second key is this: the brighter the picture you carry of yourself, the harder it becomes to forgive the one crack in it. Jung wrote in Collected Works 11, paragraph 131, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." Notice what that means. It is not that good people have small shadows. It is the opposite. The more polished the self-image, the more compressed and heavy the unlit part becomes. If you think of yourself as patient, the one outburst sits in you like a stone. If you think of yourself as loyal, the one betrayal will not dissolve no matter how you argue with it. This is the quiet trap. You assume the act was uniquely terrible, but often the real reason you cannot forgive it is that it does not match the story you have told about who you are. And a mismatch like that cannot be reasoned away. It can only be faced. Picture two people who did the very same regrettable thing. One has a flexible, humble sense of self, room in it for failure, and she moves through the guilt in a season. The other has built an identity on being the reliable one, and years later, he is still circling the same night. The difference was never the size of the wrong, it was the size of the shadow the good image had been pressing down and calling private. Think of an ordinary household, a man known for 20 years as the even-tempered one, the one who never raises his voice. That reputation becomes a house he lives inside, and every flash of irritation gets filed somewhere out of sight because it does not belong there. One worn, thin evening he snaps. Briefly, once, and the words are forgotten by the person who heard them within a week. But he cannot let them go, because the outburst is not simply a bad moment to him, it is a foreign object lodged inside a portrait with no room for it. If he had never built that identity, the outburst would have troubled him for a day and passed. It is not the act that haunts him, it is the distance between the act and the portrait, and the same mechanism shows up smaller, quieter. The person proud of always answering messages promptly, who lets 3 go unanswered, 1 drowning weak and cannot stop apologizing for it. The person who has built a private identity around never needing help, and the one afternoon he asks for it, spends weeks feeling as though he betrayed something essential. None of these are moral catastrophes, and yet they sit heavier than they should, because the true weight is not the act. It is the argument between the act and the untouchable portrait hung on the wall of the self. Correct yourself gently here. This is not proof you are secretly wicked. It is proof you built an ideal too bright to argue with, and now the unlit part of it wants its meeting. The very shine you were so proud of is what gave the shadow its weight. I stopped polishing the portrait long enough to see what it was hiding. The third key is this: facing what you did takes what Jung called considerable moral effort, a phrase from Ion, paragraph 14. And I want to give you a picture for that effort, because it is not abstract. Jung recalled a dream from his own life in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. In it he is walking against a howling wind, night all around him, and he carries a small lantern that keeps threatening to go out. He cups it with both hands. He leans his whole body into the gale. He presses forward one difficult step at a time, and only afterward does he understand that behind him, cast by his own tiny light, walks an enormous shadow, taller than any building he has ever stood beside. And here is the part worth keeping. The shadow was not chasing him. It was following the very lantern he was trying so hard to protect. That is the shape of moral effort. You do not go hunting the shadow directly. You do not turn around in the storm to face it. You carry your small, honest light forward, through a difficult night, and the shadow shows itself only as a consequence of that light, never as its enemy. Notice, too, that the wind in the dream never stops. The effort is not rewarded with calm weather. The effort is simply continuing to walk while the storm keeps blowing. And this is exactly what moral effort feels like in an ordinary week. It rarely feels like triumph. It usually feels like walking against something that will not let up. And this matters because so many people quietly wait for the wind to die down before they are willing to look at what they have done. They tell themselves they will deal with it once things are calmer, once the week eases, once they feel stronger. But the wind was never going to die down first. Jung's own dream did not include a version where the storm politely paused so he could examine his lantern in peace. The walking and the storm happen at the same time, always. Now imagine a woman who years ago, early in her career, let a colleague's idea be credited to her in a meeting. She said nothing in the moment, told herself she would correct it later, and later never came. For a long while she tried to be rid of the memory the way you might try to blow out a candle from across the room. She avoided that colleague at company events. She told herself the credit had not mattered much in the end. She reminded herself she had gone on to work hard and earn plenty on her own terms since. None of that blew the candle out. The memory kept relighting itself. Usually at the exact hour she sat down to plan her own team's work. And one year, she finally did something small and unglamorous. She wrote the colleague a plain, specific note, naming exactly what had happened, not vague regret, not a general apology for anything that ever hurt anyone, but the one sentence that mattered: "This idea was yours and I let it be taken as mine." That letter did not undo the years. It did not make the old scene disappear from her memory, and she did not expect it to. What it did was let her keep walking. The shadow that had been standing in front of her, blocking every step, moved to where it belonged, behind her, following the light instead of swallowing it. Notice also what she did not do. She did not wait for the colleague to reply. She did not need forgiveness handed back across the counter to feel the shift, because this was never a transaction with the colleague in the first place. It was a private act of moral effort that happened to take the shape of a letter. The letter was the lantern, not the destination. This is the part people skip. They think facing the shadow means standing still and staring at it until it dissolves, turning around again and again in the storm to check if it is gone. But Jung's lantern does not stare backward. It keeps moving forward. One honest step, then another. And the shadow, however large, keeps its proper place. Behind, I carry my own lantern, and let the shadow walk behind me. The fourth key is this: forgiving another person can often happen through withdrawing a projection, seeing that some of what enraged you in them was, as Jung put it in Ion, paragraph 17, the replica of one's own unknown face, and once you see that, some of the charge drains out, some of the heat cools, because part of what you were fighting was never fully theirs to begin with. But self-forgiveness does not get that exit. There is no projection to withdraw when the wrong is your own, nothing to hand back, nowhere else for the darkness to have come from. This is the harder honesty. And it is also, strangely, the cleaner one. Because when you forgive someone else by seeing your own shadow in their face, a part of you can still quietly believe the shadow belongs mostly to them. Some residue always stays on the other side of the transaction, a small, unexamined comfort that says, yes, I contributed, but they started it. They were the screen. But when you forgive yourself, there is no screen left standing. Imagine a man who lied to a friend about something small, a missed favor, a broken promise, and for years afterward, he tells the story to himself in a way that keeps shifting the weight. He remembers the friend's tone as harsher than it was. He remembers the circumstances as more forgivable than they were. He is, without quite noticing, doing to his own memory what he once did with other people's faces, trying to find someone or something to project the wrong onto. A bad week, a bad mood, a friend who overreacted. And none of it holds, because the lie was his, spoken by his own mouth, in his own voice, and no amount of reframing the other person moves the weight off him. And if you have ever caught yourself rehearsing an old failure and noticing how the supporting cast keeps changing in your memory, the tone someone used, the pressure you were supposedly under, the excuse that keeps getting slightly larger with each retelling, that is exactly this mechanism at work. The mind reaching for a screen that simply is not there to receive the image. That failure to find an exit is not a punishment, it is a doorway. It is the moment the real work can finally begin, because as long as there is somewhere else to send the feeling will keep traveling, looking for a place to land that is not you, and only when it finds none does it finally sit still long enough to be looked at honestly. This is why self-forgiveness, for all its heaviness, is in one sense simpler than forgiving another. There is no negotiation with a second party, no reading of their intentions, no wondering how much of the offense was truly theirs, and how much was your own old wound meeting their careless word. There is only you, the act, and the plain fact of it. Less room for illusion, less room to half-do it, and stripped of every projection, every excuse borrowed from someone else's face. What remains is smaller than you feared, and more workable than you expected. I do not need someone else's face to carry what is mine. Before the fifth key, let me say this plainly. If this teaching is finding you at the right hour, consider subscribing so the next one arrives when you need it. That is really the whole ask. Nothing more urgent than that. The fifth key is the deepest one, and it comes in 3 parts, so stay with me through all of them. First, consider this. The harsh inner judge that will not let the old wrong go is not, as it likes to present itself, a voice of pure conscience. Jung taught that unacknowledged shadow material often disguises itself as morality, wearing the robes of judgment so it can keep operating unseen. And this disguise works because it borrows the language of virtue. It tells you the circling proves how seriously you take your own conduct. It tells you a truly good person would keep the wound fresh forever, that letting it soften would be a kind of moral laziness, and so you keep the courtroom open, thinking you guard your integrity, when really you are feeding an old pattern a fresh meal every night. So when you find yourself circling the same failure at 2 in the morning, ask what that circling is actually doing. Is it producing any new understanding, any new fact you did not already have last month? Or is it the same scene, replayed at the same volume, with the verdict never quite finalized? If it is the second, this is not conscience at work. Conscience does its job and falls silent. This is the shadow keeping its old job under a new title, wearing the gavel like a badge it was never given, and a voice that sounds severe often gets mistaken for a voice that is righteous, as though harshness itself were proof of moral seriousness. But true conscience tends to be quiet, specific, and satisfied once its point is made. This other voice is loud, vague, and never satisfied, no matter how many times you have already suffered for the same old scene. That alone is worth noticing the next time it speaks. Second, consider an ordinary day, because this is where the mechanism becomes undeniable. You wake, and for a moment, before memory fully arrives, you are simply yourself, unburdened. Then somewhere around your second coffee, the memory surfaces uninvited, and your chest tightens exactly the way it did the first time, as though no time has passed. By mid-morning you are busy, composed on the surface, but some fraction of your attention has never left that old scene. A second, quieter job you are working without pay. Then at lunch, someone mentions a mistake of their own, and you hear yourself say something generous. That is human. Do not be so hard on yourself. And you mean it completely. Then in the afternoon someone forgives you for something small and unrelated, and you feel a flash of something almost unbearable underneath your relief, because they extended to you, casually, the very thing you cannot manage to extend to yourself for something far larger. By mid-afternoon, you are doing arithmetic you did not sign up for, deciding your old failure is worse than theirs, deciding you have no right to the ease you just offered a friend at lunch. And by late afternoon, a low static has settled over everything. A meeting feels heavier than it should. A small criticism lands 3 times harder than its size. And none of it is really about the meeting. It is the accumulated weight of a courtroom quietly in session since you opened your eyes. By evening you are tired in a way that has nothing to do with the day's actual labor. And if you are honest with yourself before sleep, that tiredness has a name. It is the cost of holding a courtroom open in your own chest for years. It's the gavel resting there, never once brought down. This is not weakness. It is simply what an unmade decision costs, hour after hour, a tax paid quietly. And most people never once add up the bill. They only feel vaguely depleted and assume that is just what it means to be a serious, conscientious person. Consider what Jung wrote in Collected Works 13. Paragraph 335. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And notice what that line rules out. It rules out the fantasy of forgiving yourself by simply deciding to feel differently, by repeating comforting words until the old scene goes quiet on its own. That is, imagining figures of light, and it rarely holds, because the darkness underneath was never actually looked at, only papered over. What holds instead is the harder, plainer thing, naming the act exactly, without softening it and without inflating it, saying, "This happened, I did this, and here is precisely what it cost, and here is what it does not make me." That plain naming is the moral effort the third key described. And here, pause for a moment and pick one real thing, something specific you have never once let yourself write in full sentences. Take a page and write down what actually happened, without excusing it and without punishing yourself further either, just the plain facts. And notice the strange relief underneath the discomfort of doing this. That relief is not absolution, it is contact. The darkness finally seen once, clearly, instead of endlessly reenacted at 2 in the morning, and this is where the "not like me" list becomes useful again. Turn toward yourself. Take a page and write the qualities you have always insisted are simply not like you. Gentle people write cruel there. Honest people write deceptive there. Brave people write cowardly there. And ask yourself quietly whether the very thing you cannot forgive is sitting somewhere on that list, dressed as an exception, a strange accident that does not really count. Because it is rarely an exception. It is usually the exact shape of what you refuse to let belong to you. And once it is named plainly, in your own handwriting, it no longer needs to be reenacted nightly. The courtroom does not need to stay lit forever once the verdict has actually been read instead of endlessly deferred. And the plain page you write is not a confession offered to some outside judge. There is no one grading it. It exists only so that you, the one person who has been avoiding this meeting, can finally sit across from yourself and see the thing as it actually is, sized correctly, neither shrunk nor magnified. That is the whole of the fifth key, spoken now as one piece. The judge you hear at night is not conscience. It is shadow wearing conscience's robes. The ordinary day quietly shows you the cost of the unmade decision, hour by hour, and the way through is not brighter imagining, not softer self-talk, but plainer seeing. One honest sentence written where 1,000 silent replays used to live. I stop performing the verdict, and I finally read it. The sixth key is this. Forgiving yourself was never going to feel like the wrong disappearing. It feels instead like finally being able to hold it, the way you might hold something heavy but no longer dangerous. And I want you to notice how different that is from what you have probably been hoping for. You have probably been hoping for the memory to go quiet, for the scene to stop replaying, for some morning to arrive where you simply do not think of it anymore. And when that morning never comes, you take it as proof that you have failed at forgiving yourself. But that is not what forgiveness was ever meant to deliver. Jung was careful to say, the shadow is not evil, only unlived, only unacknowledged. And the same is true of the worst thing you did. It does not have to be excused to be carried honestly. It only has to be seen, named, and set down inside a self-image roomy enough to include it. Imagine a man who, years ago, let his brother take the blame for something that was mostly his own doing, said nothing at the time, told himself the silence was small, and for a long while afterward, he tried every trick he knew to be rid of it. He apologized once, quickly, almost in passing, hoping the words alone would dissolve it. They did not. He tried reasoning with himself, telling himself it was a long time ago, that his brother had likely forgotten, that surely he had suffered enough privately to balance the scale. None of it worked. The thing kept surfacing, uninvited, on ordinary afternoons, and what finally changed was not a bigger apology or a cleverer argument. It was that he stopped trying to make the memory vanish and instead let himself actually hold it, the way you hold a stone you keep in your pocket, not because you enjoy its weight, But because pretending you never picked it up only makes the weight heavier, that roomier self is not a weaker one. It is the truer one. The brighter your old ideal of yourself, the denser the shadow it cast, and the gentler, more honest picture you are building now casts less shadow because it was never pretending to be perfect in the first place. And this is worth saying plainly before we close. The goal was never a self with no stones in its pocket. There is no such self. Not for you, not for anyone who has lived long enough to have done something they regret. The goal is a pocket large enough and a hand steady enough to carry what is actually there without needing to hide it from yourself any longer. This is why forgiving yourself is harder than forgiving them, and also why, once done, it tends to hold in a way the other kind sometimes does not, because it was never borrowed light. It was your own small lantern, carried forward, on a difficult night, and the stone in the man's pocket did not disappear either. It simply stopped being the only thing his hand reached for. I carry what I did without needing it to vanish. Here is the whole picture. Forgiving another is crossing a bridge. Forgiving yourself is standing inside the house. The brighter the self-image, the denser the shadow it hides. Moral effort is a lantern carried forward, not a light stared into. There is no projection to withdraw when the wrong is your own, only direct contact. The harsh judge is often shadow-wearing conscience's robes, and the ordinary day quietly bills you for every hour. The verdict stays open, and the way through is not brighter imagining, but plainer naming. One meeting, at last, with your own unknown face, and you begin to see that all 6 keys were really one key, turned 6 times. The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, was never the erasing of that meeting, it was the surviving of it. I make the unconscious conscious, and if some old unforgiven thing in you has been circling quietly this whole time, waiting for its name, I will leave you with the only question that ever really settles it. What would it cost you tonight, simply to see it plainly? And let that be enough,